Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the euro, even as the eyes of the world turn to Mario Draghi and the European Central Bank and its efforts to save the euro. I have the pleasure of being joined today by a specialist in the field of banking, Thierry Philipponnat, who is the Secretary General of Finance Watch, an NGO, a public interest organisation that was set up just over a year ago to help counteract the weight of the banking lobby in the moves towards greater financial regulation and reform. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. First question, I suppose,
it's a pleasure to be with you.
In these troubled times is, can Super Mario, as some call him, actually save the euro? Is he the man for the job? Can it be done?
Well, Super Mario is clearly someone of experience, but I don't think that anyone has the power today in Europe in general, in the Eurozone in particular, to save the euro by himself or herself. The euro problem is a systemic problem. It's a question of coherence of the political, economic, and financial structure that has been put together around the euro, and that is the source of all problems. And no single person can save that by himself.
And of course, as you say, there are those structural problems, those problems that perhaps should have been seen a long time ago. And now the Europeans sort of spend their time trying to put out these fires, even as they try to get to the bottom of those structural problems. We've seen in the last couple of weeks all eyes very clearly turn to the European Central Bank in the hope that something could be done to rescue the currency from its current troubles. Is the key not really the strength of the European Central Bank now at this stage and its ability to go beyond its current constitution?
No, it's an important factor, but it's not the key issue. The key issue, as Mario Draghi has himself put it very clearly, is a political one. The political issue is that the euro today is not a complete currency. By complete currency, I mean a currency that would have a European taxpayer. Today, there is no such thing as a European taxpayer. Taxpayers do not pay their taxes to the EU, they pay the taxes to the member countries. And the other thing is the central bank, European Central Bank, doesn't have the power to monetize sovereign debt. And as long as you don't have a central bank that doesn't have the power to monetize sovereign debt and you don't have a taxpayer, then you don't have a complete currency. And the consequence of that is very easy to see. If you compare the situation between the UK and Spain, which have very comparable fiscal and debt situations, interest rates in the UK in the sterling area, sterling zone, are around 1.5%. In Spain, they are above 7%. So you have very similar fiscal and economic situations leading to completely different monetary situations and financing situations. And obviously, in one situation, the UK example, the situation is manageable. Doesn't mean it's easy. The UK has many things to do and has a number of problems to sort out, but it's manageable. In the Spanish context, the very same situation leads to a situation that is not manageable or is extremely difficult to manage. And that is the mere consequence of the fact that the euro is not a complete currency. So I know the issues around, creating money and inflation, consequences of that, but we have to face to reality.
But that particular reality that you talk about, the need for a complete currency, as you call it, would require far more than the banking union that's been announced. And we've seen a number of governments drag their feet even on that. It would require a fiscal union. It would require a political union of the sort that is almost unimaginable today.
You're absolutely right. I mean, banking union makes sense, but taken alone, it will not solve the problems of the Eurozone. It's a good ingredient, so to speak. If it's one of the 4 or 5 ingredients that we need, yes, let's go for it. But for one thing, there is no such thing as banking union without fiscal union. Because if you talk about banking union, means you need an authority to bail out banks. And that authority has got to have power, financial power. And that financial power can only come from member countries. That means that member countries have got to contribute financially to that bailout structure. and therefore you need fiscal union. So if you don't have, and the step after that is obviously if you want to have fiscal union, you need to have political union, because in a democracy you cannot have fiscal union without political union. So the right steps are going further on the political union route, then go towards a perhaps limited but coherent fiscal union, and then you can implement a number of measures like banking union and everything. But that is sort of like the third step.
But it seems most improbable from where we stand today to imagine that the nations involved would relinquish the necessary amounts of their own sovereignty to allow all that to happen, and fast enough that the euro might be saved.
It's impossible to predict whether the euro will be saved or not. It's certainly not my role, and I'm not sort of looking into the future. So maybe I don't want to go into that. But what you're saying is correct. It's difficult to see how we're going to get all the ingredients together in order to do what I just described very briefly. But one thing is certain is that we need to build something that is coherent. And at the moment, and that's what we've been seeing for the past 2.5 years, we are going from crisis to crisis. Each time we're being told there are emergency measures that will save the world or the euro or the eurozone, and then each time 2 or 3 weeks later, the situation starts degenerating again. And the reason for that is very simple. The reason is that we're not addressing the fundamental core issues at the heart of it all. And until elected officials and politicians and leaders do not address the issue, we will not solve the crisis. Even a very powerful central bank cannot do that.
And of course, in the meantime, until we get to the point where leaders address the issues that you talk about, all eyes do turn in times of emergency to people like Mario Draghi, to institutions like the European Central Bank, as we scrabble around for immediate solutions to much more fundamental questions. And so, as we do, one starts to look at people like Mario Draghi. He himself is facing, of course, an inquiry in front of the European mediator about his involvement in the Group of 30, a group of private and public bankers to which he belongs. The NGO that is bringing the complaint suggests that someone who is involved in such a grouping is not the man with the necessary impartiality and distance from the banking lobby to lead an institution like the European Central Bank. Do you agree?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it is not Finance Watch's mission to look into the sort of topics because we have another mission, which is to look after the interest dimension, public interest dimension of financial regulation and make sure that finance serves society. So we have a much more systemic approach as opposed to who has conflicts of interest type of approach. Second thing I want to say is that it is not only very legitimate but very good that some NGOs should specialize on those particular issues and should investigate, because this is precisely what puts the necessary pressure on the system and on the people running the system to have a coherent and ethical behavior. This is particularly important in a context where the power of the financial lobby is tremendous. I mean, it's the forces of the financial lobby are just, overwhelming.
Well, you, of course, are perfectly placed to measure that, being at the head of an association that is designed to counteract it. It's difficult for people to understand, perhaps, just how strong that lobby is, but we've really felt its weight, have we not, over the course of the last few years, ever since the events that began back in 2008, and the failure, really, of the banking system to reorganize itself in a way that, to the general public at least, seems in any way to be a step in the right direction.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, the actual weight of the financial lobby, if you just take the Brussels scene, is about 700 lobbyists working full-time for the financial industry, pleading for their private interest. And the consequence of that is that systematically, whether on very broad level or very broad topics or very specific topics, you have a constant presence and pressure on legislators and supervisors trying to influence in the direction that will be good for private interest. And private interests, of course, are legitimate and indispensable. There's also something called public interest, which is not the sum of private interest. And this is precisely what Finance Watch is about, trying to balance out the arguments in a normal game of checks and balances, and that inherent to democracy, so that legislators can listen to the two sides of the arguments.
It's a tremendously daunting task. Can a single organization do it?
Well, that's what we're working on. The thing is, I mean, quantity is one thing, the quantity of lobbyists, but one thing that is absolutely vital is the willingness of people, of elected officials, of supervisors to listen to the people who come to them to talk to them. Finance Watch is lucky to have been created from a call from legislators saying we need a counterweight, because if we don't have that counterweight, we legislators cannot do our job properly. So the fact that they call for Finance Watch to exist means that now that we're up and running, they're willing to listen to us. That doesn't mean they follow everything we say. Of course not. This is not what democracy is about. But at least we get a chance to speak to them, and they listen to our arguments.
Thierry Philipponnat, thank you very much indeed for having been our guest today. That brings us to the end of today's interview. We'll be back, though, very shortly for another here on France 24. I do hope you'll stay with us.